I worked 31 years at the same lumber yard in Boise, Idaho. 31 years of 6 a.m. starts, sawdust in my hair, splinters in my palms, and a thermos of bad coffee that my wife Norma packed every single morning without me ever asking. I knew every board foot of that place by feel. I could tell the difference between Douglas fir and ponderosa pine just by smell. The owner, old Pete Caldwell, used to joke that I probably bled sawdust instead of blood. When Norma passed, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, I kept going in, not because I needed the money. We've been careful over the years. Paid off the house on Clearwater Drive in 2009. No credit card debt. A retirement account that wasn't going to make anyone rich but wasn't embarrassing either. I kept going in because I didn't know what else to do with myself at 5:30 in the morning when I woke up and her side of the bed was cold. That was 3 years before any of this started. I'm telling you that so you understand the shape of things. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is, even now. His name is Miles. He's 42. Works in commercial real estate, or at least that's what he tells people at dinner parties. What that actually means is he brokers deals for other people and collects a commission when things go right and disappears when they don't. He's charming. He's always been charming. When he was 9 years old, he talked his way out of a 2-week grounding after I caught him throwing rocks at the neighbor's car. Didn't even deny it. Just looked at me with those eyes and explained, very calmly, that he'd had a bad day at school. I grounded him for 1 week instead. Norma gave me a look that said she was not impressed with my negotiating skills. He met his wife at a conference in Seattle. Her name is Jade. She's 36, works in marketing, and she has a way of smiling at you that never quite reaches her eyes. I noticed that early on. Norma noticed it too. She mentioned it once, quietly, maybe 6 months before she got sick, and we never talked about it again after the diagnosis because suddenly there were other things to talk about. They got married 4 years ago. I flew to Portland for the wedding, sat in the front pew, cried a little because Norma should have been there. Miles cried too. Whatever else I can say about him, he loved his mother. Jade stood at the altar, looking like a magazine cover, and I told myself that I was being unfair, that grief makes you suspicious of happiness, that I should give her a real chance. I gave her a real chance. For the first 2 years, things were fine. Miles and Jade lived in a condo in Boise, about 20 minutes from my house. We had Sunday dinners a couple of times a month. Jade brought wine and made comments about my kitchen being retro, which I understood to mean old, and I laughed because I didn't feel like fighting about it. She started calling me by my first name, Roy, almost immediately, never Dad or even Mr. Brennan. And I let that go too. I was letting a lot of things go in those years. Grief does that to you. It rounds off your edges. Then Miles called me in March, about 2.5 years ago now. He said he and Jade were looking at houses. They'd found something perfect, a 4-bedroom on the east side, Hood School District, even though they didn't have kids yet. Big backyard, the whole picture. The problem was the down payment. With their combined income, they could manage the mortgage, but the 20% down was sitting just out of reach. He asked if I could help. I asked how much. $60,000. I sat with that for a moment. 60,000 was not nothing. But I had it. The house was paid off. My Social Security plus my pension from the lumberyard covered my monthly expenses with room to spare, and the retirement account had done reasonably well. Norma and I had always said that money was for the kids eventually. Miles was the only kid we had. I told him I'd think about it. I called my attorney, a woman named Sandra Cho, who I'd used for Norma's estate, and I asked her what the smart move was. She said if I was going to give that kind of money to family, I should do it as a documented loan with a simple promissory note, or at minimum get something in writing that acknowledged the gift. She said she'd seen too many situations go sideways. I thought about that advice for 4 days. Then I called Miles back and told him I'd give him the money. Not a loan. A gift. Because he was my son and Norma would have wanted it, and I was tired of being the kind of person who made his own kids sign paperwork. I wired the $60,000 on a Thursday morning. They closed on my house in April. I drove over to see it the weekend they moved in. It was a nice house. Brick front, mature trees in the yard, a porch that got afternoon shade. Miles was in a good mood carrying boxes, laughing. Jade gave me a tour and pointed out everything they were planning to change. the carpet, the kitchen backsplash, the light fixtures in the master bedroom. I nodded and said it all sounded great, and I meant it. I drove home feeling something close to happy for the first time in a while. I don't know exactly when things started to shift. That's the honest answer. It wasn't one moment. It was more like a slow leak. You don't notice the water until the floor is already warped. The Sunday dinners moved from my house to theirs, which made sense since they had more space. Then they became less frequent. Then Miles started texting instead of calling. Short texts, 1 or 2 sentences. When I called, it often went to voicemail. I told myself he was busy. He was always busy. Real estate is a relationship business, he used to say, meaning he had a lot of dinners and drinks with clients that ran late. About 8 months after they moved in, Jade called me directly, which was unusual, and said they'd been thinking. The guest room at their house was just sitting empty most of the time, and they felt bad knowing I was alone in a 4-bedroom house. She said it in a way that sounded generous, like they were doing me a favor by suggesting I consider selling my place and moving into their guest room. I told her I appreciated the thought and that I was doing fine. She brought it up twice more over the next 2 months. Each time she framed it differently. Once it was about my health. You're not getting younger, Roy. And once it was about the housing market. How I could sell at a peak and free up the equity while prices were still high. That was interesting phrasing. Free up. Like my home was capital that was being wasted by me living in it. I didn't say that. I just said I'd think about it. Miles never brought it up directly. That was also interesting. What happened next is still hard for me to explain without feeling like a fool. My only defense is that loneliness is a real thing and it operates quietly, the same way carbon monoxide does. You don't smell it. You just smell it. You just slowly stop thinking clearly. I agreed to a trial. That's what Jade called it. A trial. I would stay with them for a month or 2, get a feel for it, and we'd all decide together whether a more permanent arrangement made sense. I kept my house. I didn't sell it, didn't rent it, just locked it up and drove over with 2 suitcases and a box of things I wanted nearby. My books, the photo albums, Norma's coffee mug that I'd been using every morning since she died, the one with the chipped handle that said, "World's okayest human." The first 2 weeks were genuinely pleasant. We had dinner together most nights. Jade cooked. She's a good cook, I'll say that. Miles and I watched baseball on Sunday afternoons. I started thinking maybe I'd been wrong about her. Maybe the wariness I'd carried was just grief, looking for somewhere to land. Then small things started happening. My books got moved from the guest room shelves to a box in the closet because Jade wanted to use the shelves for decorative items. She mentioned it after the fact, not before. I found my books in a closed cardboard box with Roy Storage written on the side in her handwriting. My parking spot in the driveway disappeared when Jade started parking her second car there. She had her daily car and a weekend car, which I didn't know about until it was occupying the space I'd been using. I started parking on the street. The guest room got referred to in conversation as the extra room. Not my room. The extra room. I noticed when it started happening, but I didn't say anything because I was a guest. Guests don't complain about rooms. That's the logic I was using, and looking back I can see how well that worked out for me. A friend of Jade's came to stay for a long weekend in October, a woman named Petra from Portland, and I was told, not asked, that I'd be more comfortable in the pull-out couch in the basement while Petra used the extra room. I slept on the pull-out couch for 4 nights. It was not comfortable. I started going back to my house on Clearwater Drive during the days while Miles and Jade were at work. I'd sit in my own kitchen, drink coffee from my own coffee maker, look at the backyard where Norma's rose bushes were still coming back every spring. Even though I'd done nothing to deserve it, I started spending longer and longer there. Some nights I ate dinner there alone and then drove back to sleep in the extra room. I should have just moved back. I know that now. But I'd told Miles and Jade I was doing a trial, and there was some stubborn part of me that didn't want to be the one who quit. The one who couldn't make it work. I'd survived 31 years at a lumber yard and 14 months of watching my wife die slowly, and I was not going to be beaten by a domestic arrangement. That stubbornness cost me. In January, Jade asked me if I'd be willing to contribute to the household expenses. She said it casually over dinner, like it had just occurred to her. She had a figure already. $800 a month, she said, which would cover my share of utilities, groceries, and general upkeep. I said I needed to think about it. I called Sandra Cho the next morning. She asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. She asked whether my name was on anything in that house. A lease, a utilities account, anything. It wasn't. She asked whether I had anything in writing about the trial arrangement, the $60,000, any of it. I didn't. She said quietly that I should be careful. I asked what she meant. She said that under Idaho law, a person staying in a private residence without a lease or formal agreement has very limited protections. She said the $60,000 gift without documentation was a gift, legally complete, no strings, no claim. She said I should consider whether my living situation gave me any leverage, or whether it was actually the reverse. I drove back to the house that afternoon and sat in my kitchen on Clearwater Drive for 2 hours. When I drove back to Miles and Jade's that evening, Jade was in the kitchen and Miles was in the living room on his laptop. I told Miles I needed to talk to both of them. He looked up briefly and said they were actually pretty tired, and could it wait until the weekend? I said it couldn't. He closed the laptop. Jade came in from the kitchen. I told them I was going to move back to my house permanently, that I appreciated the time I'd spent with them, but it wasn't working for me and I thought we'd all be better off with some space. Jade nodded slowly with a particular look on her face. Not sad, thoughtful, almost. Like she was recalculating something, Miles said. Dad, I really think you should reconsider. You're alone over there. I said I was aware of that. He said, Mom wouldn't want you to be alone. That one landed. I'll be honest. It landed hard. He knew it would. He's always known which words go where. I said that I'd made up my mind and that I was going home in the morning. That night I packed my 2 suitcases and the box with my books and Norma's mug. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. and slept better than I had in months on that pull-out mattress in the extra room that used to be called a guest room. In the morning I loaded my car before either of them was up. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said I was grateful for their hospitality and that I'd call Miles later in the week. I drove to Clearwater Drive, unlocked my own front door, and stood in my own hallway for a moment. It smelled like my house, like old wood and whatever Norma used to use on the hardwood floors, even though I hadn't used it in 3 years. I put on coffee. 2 days later, Miles called. Not to check on me. Or not only that, he said he and Jade had been talking and they felt like I'd left on bad terms and they wanted to clear the air. I said I hadn't left on bad terms, I'd just gone home. He said Jade was hurt. I said I was sorry to hear that. He said they were planning to have a few people over that weekend, a little get-together, and they hoped I'd come. I said I'd think about it and I never called back. A week after that, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, Hi Roy, this is Jade. Just wanted you to know we had a great time this weekend. The house feels so much more relaxed now. Hope you're well. She had sent it from a new number. I didn't know why she had a new number. I didn't ask. I sat with that text for a long time. The house feels so much more relaxed now. I turned it over and looked at it from different angles. I thought about the books in the box marked Roy's storage, and the parking spot, and the pull-out couch, and the $800 a month, and the $60,000 I'd wired on a Thursday morning because I didn't want to make my son sign paperwork. Then I called Sandra Cho again. This conversation went differently. I wasn't calling for reassurance this time. I told her everything, the $60,000, the trial, the $800 ask, the text. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She said there were a few things worth exploring. She said the $60,000 gift, while legally a gift, created a moral and potentially arguable financial obligation, especially if I could demonstrate that it was given in reliance on an implied agreement about our future relationship and living arrangement. She said this was not a slam-dunk legal argument, but it was not nothing either. She said more importantly, and she said more importantly, with some emphasis, she wanted to know more about Miles's real estate business. She asked whether I had any reason to believe he'd represented the state of that business to me inaccurately. I said I didn't know. I said I didn't assume things were going well because he never said otherwise. She said, that's worth knowing more about. Over the next 3 weeks, I did some quiet research. I'm not a sophisticated person when it comes to finances, but I know how to read county property records and I know how to talk to people. Miles had done 3 deals in the past year, according to what I could piece together. One had fallen through. The commission on the other 2 was not what I would call robust. The condo they'd lived in before the house, I tracked down the landlord through a mutual acquaintance, had apparently ended with some dispute over the security deposit and the last month's rent. I brought all of this to Sandra. She said it painted an interesting picture, but wasn't by itself actionable. Then she asked about the house on Clearwater Drive. She asked if I'd had it appraised recently. I had not. She asked whether I'd updated my will since Norma's death. I had not done that either. We spent the better part of 2 hours that afternoon going through everything: the retirement accounts, the house, the life insurance policy I'd been carrying for 20 years that I'd never really looked at closely. By the end of it, I had a list of things to do that felt less like legal tasks and more like waking up. I updated my will. I named a different beneficiary for the retirement account. Sandra recommended a charitable trust as a placeholder while I thought more carefully about my intentions. I had the house on Clearwater Drive appraised. It came in at $412,000, which was more than I'd expected. I had a conversation with my financial advisor that I should have had 2 years earlier. And I wrote a letter, not a legal letter. Sandra drafted the legal correspondence separately. This was a personal letter to Miles. I wrote it by hand, 3 pages, on the stationery Norma used to use. I told him that I loved him and that I always would. I told him that I understood he was under financial pressure and that I wished he'd trusted me enough to tell me directly. I told him that the $60,000 was still a gift. I wasn't asking for it back. I told him that I was not angry at him, that anger wasn't what I was feeling. What I was feeling was something more like clarity, like when the morning fog burns off on the river and you can finally see how far you are from the bank. I told him that I'd spent 3 years after his mother died trying to find a version of family that would fill in the shape of what we'd lost, and that it had led me into some situations I should have been smarter about. I told him I was doing things differently now. I told him my door was open on my terms whenever he wanted to have an honest conversation. I sealed the letter and mailed it. I don't know if he read it. 3 weeks later, Miles showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening. No text first, no call, just knocked. I let him in. He sat at my kitchen table where he'd sat 10,000 times as a kid doing homework, and he looked at his hands for a while without saying anything. Then he said, "Dad, I'm in some trouble." I said, "I know." He said the real estate business had been slower than slow, honestly stalled for over a year. He said he'd been covering the gap with credit cards and a small personal loan he hadn't told Jade about. He said the house was tighter than they'd let on. He said Jade didn't know all of it. I asked him why he hadn't come to me sooner. He said he was embarrassed. He said he was embarrassed. He said he knew I'd already given them so much, and he couldn't stand the idea of asking for more. I believed him. I believed that part was true at least. We talked for 3 hours. I didn't offer him money. He didn't ask. What I did was help him make a list. His actual debts, his actual income, what the options looked like. He needed to have a hard conversation with Jade. He probably needed to talk to a financial counselor. The house might need to go back on the market in a year or 2 if things didn't turn around. Those were hard realities, and I didn't soften them. But I sat with him while he looked at them. When he left that night, he hugged me at the door. Not the quick shoulder pat hug he'd been doing for years. He held on for a moment, and I could feel that he was trying not to cry. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "I know, son." He said, "I think Jade isn't." And then he stopped. He said, "We're going to figure it out." I said, "We're going to figure it out." I said, "Okay." I watched his taillights go down Clearwater Drive, and then I went back inside and sat in my kitchen for a long time. Norma's coffee mug was on the counter. The one with the chipped handle. World's okayest human. I thought about what she would say. I think she would say I'd taken long enough to find my footing, but that I'd found it. I think she would have had a few words about Jade that I probably shouldn't repeat. And I think she would have been glad that I'd left my door open for Miles. I'm not telling you this story to make anyone into a villain. People are complicated, and money makes them more so, And loneliness can make you give away things you shouldn't give away, whether that's money or space or the feeling that your own house belongs to you. What I know now that I didn't know 2 years ago is this: your name on the deed matters. Paperwork protects relationships. It doesn't undermine them. And when someone makes you feel like a guest in a room that used to be called a guest room, you are already one door down from being asked to leave. Don't wait until the door is closing to figure out where you stand. I'm 67 years old. I still wake up at 5:30. I still drink coffee from a mug with a chipped handle. I go back to sleep sometimes now, which is new. The rose bushes Norma planted are going to be spectacular this spring. I can already see the buds coming. Miles texts more often now. Real texts, not one-liners. He and Jade are working on things, he says. I hope they do. I hope he finds the honesty with her that it took him a long time to find with me. My door on Clearwater Drive is still open, but it opens from the inside now. I've been thinking a lot lately about how quietly a person can lose themselves, not all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment where someone takes something from you and you know exactly what's been stolen. It happens in small surrenders. A parking spot, a shelf, a room that stops being called your room. You tell yourself each time that it's a small thing, not worth the friction, and you keep moving forward until one morning you wake up on a pull-out couch in a basement, and you realize you can't remember the last time you felt like yourself. That's where I was. And if I'm being honest, I put myself there. I gave Miles $60,000 because I loved him and because his mother would have wanted me to. That part I don't regret, but I gave it without paperwork because I didn't want to seem like I didn't trust him. And that was a choice I made for the wrong reasons. I was trying to buy a feeling, warmth, closeness, the sense that our family was still intact, even without Norma. Money can't do that. It was never going to do that. And when I handed it over without any record, without any conversation about what it meant or what I expected, I wasn't being generous. I was being afraid. Fear dressed up as generosity is one of the most dangerous things I know. What I've come to understand, sitting in this kitchen on Clearwater Drive with the rose bushes coming back out front, is that integrity isn't something you perform for other people. It's the set of decisions you make when no one is watching and nothing is forcing your hand. I had chances, early on, to say clearly what I needed, to draw a line around my own dignity. I didn't take them because I told myself I was being easygoing, being a good guest, keeping the peace. But what I was actually doing was teaching everyone around me that my needs didn't have to be taken seriously. You teach people how to treat you. I've heard that said 100 times, and I always thought it was something you cross-stitched onto a pillow. I understand it differently now. Miles came to my door eventually. He sat at this table and told me the truth he'd been carrying for over a year. I didn't think he would have done that if I hadn't written the letter, and I don't think I would have written the letter if I hadn't finally stopped trying to manage the situation from a position of weakness and started thinking clearly about what was actually mine, my house, my choices, my life. When I stopped shrinking, there was suddenly something real for him to come back to. That's the thing about standing your ground. It doesn't end relationships worth keeping. It gives them something solid to stand on. I'm not a wise man. I'm a retired lumber worker from Boise who let his grief cloud his judgment for longer than I'd like to admit. But I know the difference between green wood and seasoned wood. Green wood warps under pressure. Seasoned wood holds. The difference isn't talent or luck. It's just time and what you do with it. I'm 67. I'm still seasoning.